Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. I'm Dave Turner, along with Pat Pickens. Pat, we have some real good topics to touch on today, but to me, there's one that I think has kind of caught my eye more than anything that I want to lead off with here. The Nashville Predators. They were a team that was supposed to be a lock for the playoffs, right? All of a sudden, even with this deal for Ryan Johansson, they are struggling. Is this just a blip in the radar for them, or are they really in danger of possibly losing a spot to the Colorado Avalanche or maybe another team from the Pacific or something like that?
I'll tell you what, the All-Star break seems to be coming right at the perfect time for them because they're in danger of falling out of it. The real problem with them, and we touched. Maybe we did. We haven't touched on this on Nashville at all, just because they've been kind of sailing along. Their defense has been great. Their defense has been great as always, and they've been scoring goals, and the fans down there like it, love it, want some more of it. For basically the first 30 games of the season with the Tim McGraw, and they're excited because they have the All-Star game. They've got a heck of a lot. The NHL released some of the musical stylings of that, and it's going to be real exciting weekend. And part of what's going to make that weekend so exciting is the fact Pekka Rinne is going to be there. But Dave, Pekka Rinne's been awful. And here's where you might have read a lot of stories about how awful Pekka Rinne has been this year. And, he's been very bad. He's got the 40th best save percentage of all qualifiers. His save percentage through 37 games is .902. So if you consider the fact that of all qualifiers, there's only 5 goalies who are worse than Pekka Rinne at this point. And you look at, Dave, we talked about this a little off air that Rinne's numbers were kind of hidden by the fact that last year that he had an incredible first half last year, and he had a really pedestrian second half last year. So, my thought is, when this happens, what happened? Well, Rinne was injured, obviously, and that's where his numbers went south a couple years ago. Seems like he's healthy now, although, we can't say for that for certain. But, Dave, you almost have to point to Mitch Korn's departure where, we talked about Mitch Korn, the goalie coach of the Washington Capitals, going with Barry Trotz from Nashville to Washington in terms of positive in Braden Holtby's development. But you almost could make the case that his leaving Nashville has adversely affected Rinne.
Yeah, I think that it's certainly something to discuss, though Rinne did have a very good beginning of the season last year. We, of course, had the injury the year before and all that, but that could certainly be. You look at what Braden Holtby is right now, but, for one guy's getting older, and one guy is just kind of entering his prime, so I think that plays into it. But yeah, I think you're onto something here that for me, for him to be that bad, Pekka Rinne, to be pedestrian, average right now, I don't think this team is good enough around him necessarily, especially losing defensive depth that they just did with Seth Jones. And look, Ryan Johansson comes in. He has 6 points in 6 games. So you could say that he's not the problem. The problem is that they've been giving up a ton of goals.
Yeah.
And, they've been getting blitzed. And I think they've won 1 game of the 6 since Johansson came over.
Yeah.
And here's my issue
Carolina.
and here's my issue with this trade. Ryan Johansson is a very talented young player. Here's my issue. You bring him in, especially the time that you bring him in when your team is struggling. Ryan Johansson got out of favor quickly with John Tortorella, which, okay, it's not the first person to ever have an issue with John Tortorella, and it probably won't be the last. But we see him struggling there, whether it's him not willing to work hard enough to play 3-zone hockey. And now you bring him into this situation where Nashville, to me, is teetering. If they go out and get bombed, a couple games here before the All-Star break, they might not even recover from this just because their team's waiting to pass them. I wonder if this trade is going to be egg on their face with him because he's the kind of guy that if you know what his track record is, maybe you can blame it all on Tortorella. Maybe you can't. But we've seen what he did when he was either not motivated or not wanting to play a certain way. If this team's going to struggle, where is Ryan Johansson going to fit into this, especially in the room as a new guy coming in and saying, well, what have you done to help us? All we've done is lose since you got here.
As of this recording, the Predators have played 4 games since the Johansson trade. They've gotten 1 point in those 4 games, a shootout or an overtime loss to the Jets on Thursday. So, I mean, and you said it, I think you hit it, Dave, where you said, you know, you look at who their competition has been in those games. It's been Colorado. I mean, remember they talk about that huge game, Colorado and Nashville. And Nashville, like you said, was kind of teetering anyway. And then Arizona shutout loss, you know, close loss to the Blackhawks on Tuesday night, and then the overtime loss. So, and then the coming stretch is Minnesota, Chicago, Winnipeg, and then in Edmonton. So, you know, I agree with you in that, you know, Torts has a lot of guys have fallen out of favor with Torts. And that's kind of, you know, you heard my prediction a couple weeks ago that, you know, he was going to be the guy who's, you know, let go. So you're not the first guy to fall out of favor with John Tortorella. And that's why I'm more interested in letting this play out a little bit. Because, you know, Peter Laviolette is a guy who's going to push. You know, he's a tough, strong-minded, you know, Massachusetts guy again. So it's not dissimilar from Torts, but he's not gonna blast you in the media the same way Torts would. He's not gonna, you know, alienate so many people the way Torts did, and he's gonna play that up-tempo, fast and hard style. I think personally, I think this is a slump for Nashville. I think, you know, having to deal with new personnel and yes, I agree, having to, you know, losing a skilled, big, young, fast, offensively driven defenseman is, you know, it's you don't replace those every day, especially a former number 4 overall pick. But I think this is kind of a blip in the radar for Nashville, just because, I mean, they're way too skilled to be this mediocre. Although I'll be honest, the concern is that Rinne is not going to be good enough. And who's there with him? Carter Hutton? Who else can they go out and get in a trade to kind of give him an insurance policy? Cam Ward, who's only been like the worst goalie on the planet the last 5 years. So there's no fix. You know, we had last year, we watched goaltending nearly sabotage Minnesota. And we said, oh my God, how can Minnesota do this with the goaltending? And then Dubnyk, you know, basically saved their bacon last year. Well, Dubnyk was in the Predators organization 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, and then they traded him to Montreal. It got so bad. So you wonder just if Rinne is healthy, if he's mentally struggling, but 902 isn't going to cut it.
No, it's not, and I think that they will only go as far as their goaltending takes them. I mean, even a team that you could say, all right, throw the Kings. I mean, if Jonathan Quick was having the year that Pekka Rinne is having, the Kings would probably be teetering around too. I mean, granted, they play in a division that's much weaker, but you know, I think the goaltending will be what will hold them back. But just one more point on this Johansson thing and why I don't like this trade is that if you're Columbus, and you know that probably Tortorella is a 1-year fix here and that maybe you really don't like him or whatever, who knows? But if you don't, you're trading Ryan Johansson, the young, talented forward that you just signed to a contract extension. Mm-hmm. To me, there's got to be something there that would, like, outside of that we don't know about, that would make them trade him. Because if there's an issue with the coach and you know that the coach is replaceable, why would you trade him? Yeah. To me, there's got to be something there that I worry about that Nashville just has saddled themselves with that would make a team that's looking for a superstar and has, you know, young talent and they're trying to build towards something, to trade that guy over keeping John Tortorella, something doesn't add up there to me.
The thing with that, though, is, too, you know, we all talk about how, you know, everybody loves John Davidson And you and I both grew up listening to him call national games, call Ranger games, and I'll be honest. I think this is a different tangent. That the U.S. hockey audience misses John Davidson's analysis, but his track record with Jarmo Kekalainen in Columbus has not been very good in terms of trades. In terms of there have been a couple. They got Sergei Bobrovsky, which was has turned into a solid move. But you look at some of the guys they've given up on: Derek Brassard, Jakub Voracek, the Jeff Carter. I mean, maybe it's something to do with Columbus, the city. Maybe it's the organization is toxic. But I think there's more. I mean, we like Columbus a lot in terms of their organization. They seem to have good fans. They have the cannon. I like Davidson, but there's at some point the Wolves are going to start coming out for Jarmo, especially if this Johansson for Jones deal backfires. I don't think it will because we've already seen Seth Jones post a point. He got it in Toronto, but this is 2 years in a row where they have been awful. Last year was the injuries. This year is who knows what it is, but if they have another year like this next year, you almost have to start looking at the moves the GMs make because they already fired the coach.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think both of these teams, it's funny how we're looping Columbus and Nashville in here just because of the trade. I think they both have a lot to prove. Certainly not this year for Columbus, but look, Nashville, if they fail to make the playoffs, there could possibly be changes there.
This was a big year for Nashville with the All-Star game. I mean, you almost look at last year as growth, and they had that epic series with Chicago. And if they take a regression, I don't, maybe I don't think they'll. David Poile is pretty well respected around the NHL, but I mean, there would be some whispers about that. I imagine.
I'll tell you right now, the first thing that'll happen is the Wolves will be closing on Shea Weber.
I bet Dave Poile tried to trade him, and I think Columbus probably said, we're not taking that money.
Yeah,
I mean, that's my guess because you don't think. I mean, Shea Weber's a right shot defenseman who has a ton of years on Seth Jones, and that Dave Poile said, hey, why don't you guys take Shea Weber off my hands? And Jarmo was like, no.
Yeah, it's because his money is just way too much. But now we'll stay out west a little bit for a team that everyone probably thought they were going to regress, and then the exact opposite happened. The Arizona Coyotes have been asserting themselves as the second place team here in the Pacific Division, and it's not because of Mike Smith. It's not even so much because of their scoring, but it's a young netminder, a right-handed catching netminder.
Nightmare.
Yeah, nightmare. I guess I'm having a nightmare.
Not a nightmare for everybody else, I guess.
Yeah, I guess he has been because Louis Domingue, who is a name that probably a lot of people don't even know how to pronounce yet, but you're going to see him in the playoffs possibly. So, yeah, Louis Domingue. He's 23 years old, right-handed catching goaltender, and he's been great since he came in. He's got like a 2.2 goals against, a 9.28, I believe, last time I checked, save percentage. And because of that, and the fact that he's been much better than Mike Smith was even before he went down with injury, the goaltending has really been what's pacing this team, and all of a sudden they look like the Coyotes might run away with second place here just because it's been such a cluster down in the middle of that Pacific Division there.
Yeah,
but
good word there.
Keep it family friendly. I mean, they're only 3 points ahead of San Jose, but they're 5 points clear of Vancouver, who has a game more played than them. The fact is they're 6-1-3 in their last 10. Arizona, and as much as the possession numbers don't favor them being a playoff team, but you know what? If you haven't watched Max Domi play, watch him play, and then tell me why you don't think that he could be who brings a team to the playoffs. Because look, this team, especially Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who should definitely be on the all underrated or all not talked about enough team in the NHL. This team has some players, and if they can get good goaltending, I can't see why they couldn't find a way to make a top 3 spot here with the mediocrity that's been surrounding them in the Pacific Division.
I agree with you there. We haven't talked a lot about Arizona only because we've just been waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the other shoe was Mike Smith for a while. You mentioned Matt. I mean, I was around this team a little bit early in the year, maybe like November. and talk to Max Domi. And it's weird because, you know, you look at Max Domi and you talk to Max Domi and you see his dad. And then you watch him play and you see something completely different, you know? But you're right. Their possession numbers are not very good. They're second worst in Corsi 4, 5-on-5 Corsi 4 percentage. In all situations, only ahead of the Avs. But, you know, Louis Domingue, you mentioned him. You know, Louis Domingue had that moment last year where he had his NHL debut last year, was on Super Bowl Sunday in Montreal. He's a Quebec kid, and he got his first NHL win in Montreal on Super Bowl Sunday, you know, in their annual Super Bowl Sunday afternoon game. And, you know, that it was one of those things where, like, you heard the broadcast talk about, here's a Quebec kid and here's a Quebec kid, you know, doing it against the team he grew up rooting for and the team he grew up loving. And, you know, we all talk about the dearth of goaltending that comes out of Canada now. But, you know, if this kid's going to come in and be the guy in Arizona, look out, because, you know, it may be a flash in the pan. And maybe also there's not a lot of tape on him. But, you know, this kid's had a pretty remarkable road here. You mentioned he's only 23. He went for, you know, played his junior hockey in Moncton and then Quebec, and then went to the East Coast League. He's a former 5th-round draft pick in the 2010 draft. I sound like Pierre McGuire here, don't I? Going from Gwinnett to Portland to you know, the American League for even the majority of this year, you know, 13 games. But, you know, if he's going to give them, and you know, goaltending though, Dave, we talked about Dubnyk and how good he was last year. And if he's just gaining confidence and getting hot at the right time, I mean, why can't he lead them to the postseason? You mentioned
even Hammond. I mean, look at the Hamburglar last year. And
exactly.
The thing I like is that the fact that he's a right-handed catching goaltender helps, because as much as like you brought up the point of that there needs to be tape on him, but also just the fact that it's different. And there's such few guys that do catch right-handed that I think that it makes him a little harder to decipher right away, because you shoot differently on him, and guys who are different headedness have to do things a little bit differently. So,
Dave, we agree that Vancouver is not even a threat right now, right?
No, I've kind of closed the book on them maybe a month ago. I would think Anaheim will pass them. San Jose's been better too. Calgary, to me, has been the biggest disappointment, because I thought that they started to come around a little bit, and now they've dropped off. But
yeah, I mean, if you throw out Vancouver, which, by the way, Arizona has a game in hand on Vancouver and a 5-point lead, you have 6 points. They're 6 points clear of Anaheim. They're 7 clear of Calgary. I mean, like you said, you know what? I really am happy for Dave Tippett, because, you know, this was supposed to be the year where they tanked for Austin Matthews. And to be fair, you know, Austin Matthews would do some incredible things in Arizona, the Scottsdale, Arizona kid. But, you know, if Dave Tippett's going to show that he's a damn good coach again, when it looked like last year that things were going to go south with him and losing his job potentially, and Shane Doan, you know, who's been in that one organization the whole time. I mean, I know he has, you know, there's mixed reviews on him as a person, as a player, you know, but, you know, he stuck it out. He didn't demand a trade, even though they were in a rebuild. And now it looks like, I mean, whether they become the Flames of last year in terms of actually winning a playoff series will remain to be seen. But, you know, if Arizona is going to hang on and make the postseason, you know, it'll be great for at least those two people and, you know, the fans out there, because they've been through a ton. And, you know, we all know, I mean, this isn't even their year for Arizona. You know, you got, you know, Dylan Strome down the road. You know, there's other guys in the pipeline for Arizona. And if they're going to kind of exceed expectations this year and actually make the playoffs, I mean, that's just, you think their young players are going to you have to believe that their young players are going to gain confidence from that, and it's only going to help hockey's progression out there, because, you know, they finally got stable ownership. It sounds like they're going to get a building or some kind of building thing where whether it's Scottsdale, whether they stay in Glendale or what. But it kind of seems like, for so many years we talked about Arizona and we talked about, embarrassment. We talked about, the NHL's ownership, the money problems, everything off the ice. It's kind of nice to start talking about the Coyotes on the ice.
Yeah, I mean, and also we have Florida in the same year, and sure,
yeah,
it's. I think that the saying that the league is only as strong as its weakest teams.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing. I mean, look, you and I have both kind of really enjoyed Florida playing well. And to me, I've always looked at this as I'm a fan of this game. I'm a fan of seeing great things happen on the ice. And to me, seeing fans and seeing young kids all of a sudden get introduced to the game of hockey because they see a guy like Jaromir Jagr leading this young Panthers team, or a guy like Max Domi doing such ridiculous things that a kid who's never gone to a game sees. To me, that's the best part of this, and that's why sports exists, is for people to enjoy it. And if you play to an empty building, it's upsetting. I don't care what sport it is, because these are the top athletes in the world, and people should go watch them.
And to be fair, Dave, I've been to the building. I like the building. I think the building is great. It's not near Phoenix at all, which is why the team changed its name, because Glendale is 10 miles from Phoenix, but those 10 miles at rush hour might as well be 40. But it's a good building. It's a good complex. I mean, there's the football stadiums right there. There's bars, there's restaurants, there's movie theaters, there's other things to do. It's a complex where you can, they do the TV right outside the arena. The weather is always great. So, you go, if you could get over there, you could do Margaritaville before the game, and then, the Coyotes after. So it's a fun atmosphere. It's a fun, you almost, I just wish it was closer to where the people were so they could get more people out there. But, people rag on that complex. I think, it does. You saw it Monday night in the national championship game. It was perfectly suitable then, and it's right next door to that football stadium. So it's just a matter of having good people in place and having and like you said, having the kids involved. And like you and I grew up watching hockey in the North Jersey area, and why did we get into hockey? Because we grew up watching it. We grew up around it. We grew up with fun teams and fun players and guys we could grab onto. And it sounds like they have that going on in at least, like you said, Florida. The building's not great. The complex isn't great. I mean, it's fine, but it's not near anything again. But in Arizona, it sounds like they have a lot going for them, and especially if they get something figured out with this building.
Yeah, I mean, only hope for good things. I mean, I for a while thought that they should move just because I didn't think there was a light at the end of the tunnel, but perhaps now they can make it happen. And even Florida as well, it remains to be seen. But another surprise, I guess, now that is there is that, well, I guess no one should really be surprised.
Don't be surprised.
But the Dallas Stars a few weeks ago were running away with the Central Division, and everyone else seemed like they were happy to be in the 2-3 matchup. And then, like clockwork, the light goes on in the heads of the Chicago Blackhawks, and what a surprise. As of this recording, Chicago and Dallas are tied. Mm-hmm. Pat, should anyone be even the most a bit? I mean, because it's not like Dallas has been that bad. They had a little bit of a stretch when they went out east and they struggled. But it's more been the fact that Chicago has just been on fire lately. Should anyone even be a little bit surprised that Chicago is right back in this and even fighting for the most point, possibly getting a President's Trophy right now?
No. I mean, if you look at what this team's track record is, it's that's what they do. They middle along. I mean, here's what you can be most surprised about, Dave, is the fact it started this early, because you think that they would want to, kind of still like the Kings usually do, the middle along in January, middle along in February, take off after the trade deadline, and then, get into one of those spots. No, Dallas is still in a good spot. They've got 2 games in hand on Chicago, and they're going to California this weekend, which ordinarily doesn't sound good, but these days it is. It's sort of, it's not as tricky as it was. The problem with Dallas right now is they're just, like you said, they're play fast and loose to begin with, and they're not scoring a lot is the kind of the nutty thing that I think. So, what do they have? They've got 5 goals in 3 games, which, they had 5 goals and a loss to the Islanders.
They still lead the league in goals scored, by the way.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. So they have, but 5 goals in 3 games is a little alarming. It's almost like, but the problem I think they're having at this point is the secondary scoring, and there's almost something for Jim Nill to go out and do. They actually split up Seguin and Ben to try and get, they put Spezza in the middle with Ben and Nichushkin, and it was kind of obviously to get a little bit depth in the goal scoring, but if you look at, it hasn't worked so far, so it's a problem for them at the moment where. I think they're going to find it just because they're way too skilled not to find it. John Klingberg, it's been tough for him at this point lately. Now I guess Seguin and Ben are back together because Lindy Ruff realizes that, those guys together make magic. But, I think, like Nashville, I think this is a slump for Dallas. The other thing, too, is, Dave, and we kind of have to believe this because they were not going to play as well as they did maybe for the first 3 months of the season.
No.
The goaltending's not quite. They're kind of toggling goalies at this point, right? They're going Lettinen and Niemi, and the defense is still an issue. Although the last 3 games would beg to differ, but they went to New York, they came up here, and they scored 9 goals in 3 games and got 1 point. So that leads me to believe that they need to play a little bit more structured. They need to be a little bit more set. But that's not really the style that they play. So is there cause for some concern? Yeah, because, you get, halfway through the year and you're atop the division and you're tied atop the division, but now you're starting to find some holes in your game. So that says to me that Jim Nill needs to go to work. They got the trade deadline coming up in 6 weeks or so, and it's time to start, shoring up some of those holes with whether it's another, third line scorer type, a depth and goal scoring type move, or a defenseman, because these are young players they have on their roster here, especially on the back end. You could talk about how great Alex Goligoski is as a shutdown guy, or Johnny Oduya is as kind of that defensive defenseman guy. But, you talk about, Yoki Paka and Ben and Klingberg, they're pretty young players. And is John Klingberg ready to play 30 minutes a night,
That's a good question.
And if he is, will his offense take a dip? Because if his offense takes a dip, then Dallas's offense is going to take a dip because he's such a big part of that. So, there are some moves. There are definitely moves to be made. Like Nashville or like Arizona, we said, this isn't necessarily Dallas's year, but at the same point, if you're playing that way, if you're saying, well, this isn't our year, so let's not who knows when you're going to get to that level again? We said Nashville. We thought Nashville would build off of last year to this year, and this is just gravy for us. But now they've regressed. Is Dallas in danger of doing the same thing next year? Or should Jim Nill have put all his eggs in this basket now this year with the chance to go for it? These are obvious questions. So I like I said, 2 games in hand for Dallas on Chicago at the moment. I don't know whether Corey Crawford's basically keeping Chicago in this thing at the moment in terms of like the President's Trophy in the top spot. But there's definitely some cause for concern for Dallas right now.
But here's my question on Dallas, though, is that we know they can score. Absolutely. We know that they are the best and most dynamic offensive team in the sport. Okay, that's great. Chicago, they're a team that can score pretty well too. They've got they got a couple dynamic players and so on and so forth.
Like 15 dynamic players?
Yeah, but my point is, yes, I'll give them that. But here's my question with Dallas, though, is Dallas equipped to play the kind of style that it takes to win? As much as we talk about Chicago being dynamic as well.
Yeah,
and the Kings can certainly be a team that can, everyone thinks the Kings are so heavy. The Kings have games where they can skate up and down a little bit when they want want to.
Well, they have
But
some skill for sure.
yeah, of course. But I mean, can the Stars play the heavy zone by zone war of attrition that the playoffs become? With their goaltending that's not that good, which maybe that's not that big of an issue because it's not like Chicago has had the best goaltending. But can they block shots? As an entire team, not just defensively. Can they block shots? Every man on that roster. Can they get into the dirty areas and win pucks with consistency?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I don't know. I'm not sure. Look, Dallas could go out and surprise people this year and make a cup final, and I wouldn't be in the bit surprised. But you have teams in LA and Chicago that play a certain way, and we know that it damn well works because that's who's been winning cups for the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if Dallas plays that style, and finishing on Dallas and getting into Chicago. It's just interesting that they're already getting going here because Patrick Kane has been all worldly. He's got 63 points in 46 games as of this recording. Artemi Panarin, of course, another guy comes out of nowhere. But who's been surprisingly good for them? A guy that you and I have seen a good amount of over his career, and I thought was kind of a lost name, but it made sense in that Brandon Saad trade. Artem Anisimov.
Mm-hmm.
15 goals, 9 assists. I mean, maybe the assists aren't quite there. He's shooting at 21%. He's got 15 goals, yeah. He was a player who I really liked even when he was with the Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
That's a player that really seems to fit them well, that he can kind of do a lot of things, and now he has a scoring touch. Look, to me, I mean, I guess I think it's going to come down to Chicago and Dallas in the second round of that of the Central Division playoffs. But I don't know, Pat, I'll give you one right now. If you had to pick right now, looking at these two teams and knowing what you know, does Dallas have enough to get past Chicago?
Here's what I'll say, though, is the interesting, you said it, and it just hit me. It's like, and I hate to use NBA analogies, but it's almost like when you get the run and gun game versus the half court sets, like you just said, it's whether it's going to be San Antonio's half court set where they can run an offense or this flashy Golden State style where they're just shooting the lights out and running up and down the floor.
Or the Mike D'Antoni Sons of the early 2000s with
exactly.
Amari Stoudemire, and we'll bring a Canadian to the
of course.
match. Yeah,
to bring this home for all the Canadians listening. But no, it's absolutely, you're absolutely right in that. And we watched Dallas 2 years ago in the playoffs against Anaheim, and it was the same type of thing. Dallas played its style, and the games it played its style, it won. And they put a great series against Anaheim. But when it mattered, that pressure, that heavy, that, he's not there anymore, but Devontae Smith-Pelly put his stamp on that series. And Dallas was, happy to be there. But now, is it going to be, like you said, is it one of those points? I would obviously give the edge to Chicago at this point for a number of reasons. One, they have the player, the postseason pedigree, if you will. But I'll say this, Dave, and maybe this is a point that maybe it remains to be seen whether it'll happen. And I think, but didn't the Stars go out and get Jason Spezza just for that exact reason, to have that kind of two-way center who can, produce some offense, who can lock you down defensively, and provide, that second line center depth, but also the defensive style too. I mean, that's why they shored up their, that's why Alex Goligoski's been so good for them, and they've built so much around him. And that's why they got Johnny Oduya to have some of that playoff defensive pedigree so that they can play. And here's the thing, and they haven't shown the willingness to play this style, but Lindy Ruff has coached that style to the Stanley Cup final. As quickly as we forget that there were a bunch of nobodies except Dominik Hasek on Buffalo in '99 when they made it and ironically, played to and lost to the Stars in the Cup final. I mean, you got to think that Lindy Ruff has that card still left to play in his back pocket where he says, okay, it's time to try to do this. And whether the players do it or don't will remain to be seen. But, there are definitely some personnel that has playoff pedigree that can play that lockdown style. It's just whether or not they actually do it.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. It really will be. I mean, the playoffs are a couple months away still, but I'm salivating at some of these matchups that we might get. Speaking
Well,
of a
yeah,
playoff matchup, Islanders and Rangers faced off last night from Barclays Center. Ironically, a night after the Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets
yeah.
played at Barclays Center. So
That's happened twice this year already.
yeah, it just seems like that they're just trying to make it a twofer out there. But Islanders Rangers, I would think there's a good chance these two teams are going to see each other in the playoffs, just because realistically no one is catching Washington.
Mm-mm.
And I mean, sure, Pittsburgh could insert themselves in there, and we'll get to Pittsburgh in a little bit here. But Rangers Islanders, a game where Pat, I know you had the defining stat about this game. I'll let you take that one away.
Yeah, it basically, and you know what? This is the last night or Thursday's game are the kind of games where rivalries. I mean, don't get me wrong. The Islanders and Rangers are rivals. They're probably the strongest rivals, especially now. But those are the kind of games where that just further fuels rivalries because, the Islanders and Rangers are rivals in that, they're close. They've always been close in terms of mileage and geography. But the Islanders kind of have the Rangers number here this year a little bit. I know that was the case last year in the early going, and then the Rangers kind of bit back towards the end of the year. But the Islanders now have beaten the Rangers twice. They've only played twice, but tonight or last night was the second time they played, and the second time the Islanders defended home ice at Barclays Center, and what's most remarkable to me, and the Rangers tout this stat always, the Rangers had going into last night, the Rangers had lost one of 175 games when leading after two periods since February of 2010. And the Islanders beat them in regulation for only the second time in almost 5 years when leading after two periods, which basically tells you everything you need to know about the Rangers' success locking down games because, the goaltending is great. The defense is great. They tack on goals. It just seems like every time they're up after two periods, you just say, okay, this is even tied after two periods. It feels like they're going to win every game. And the Islanders have had a lot of tumult in their year this year. I mean, the building is a disaster. Let's call a spade here. They finally got a sellout last night, and they're finally starting to get people to go. It's kind of the exciting thing as the playoffs pick up, as we get closer to the postseason, and as we as the push to that, and as it appears as if the Islanders are absolutely going to be there. There have been people criticizing John Tavares. There have been people, Travis Hamonic and the whole trade thing. They've had injuries. Johnny Boychuk's on IR now, and it's almost as if. And Jack Capuano gets a lot of flack because he's not flashy. He's not flashy. He's not, the pedigree isn't necessarily there. He's only coached the Islanders. But, Dave, here they are. They're kind of locked, maybe not locked into second place, but they're locked into a playoff spot for the second year in a row. They're kind of on, they're probably going to get in the high 90s in points for, they were over 100 last year. And it just feels like there's a lot of things that could be perceived as distraction or a tumultuous way that they've been going about things here, whether it's the schedule. I mean, they just moved their morning skates out of Brooklyn last week. So, now they're having their morning skates in Syosset, what is it, 40-minute train ride from their building. And it seems like nothing phases them, especially at home.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating. But here's my question to you, though, Pat. Looking at these two teams, the Islanders with the troubles with the new building and the fact that maybe Tavares might get sick if this team is stagnating. Yeah. The Rangers with the fact that their defense is getting older and Henrik Lundqvist is certainly towards the end of his prime. No, I would still think he has a few years left. Mm-hmm. If these two teams match up, or even if they don't, assuming they're both a playoff team, what team has more at stake this year that a first-round exit would be crippling for them? And what team, if they were put us, even if they play each other, what team would suffer worse from a loss in that series?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really hard one. That's why I'm glad you're answering it, not me.
I'd say the Rangers, only because for a couple of reasons. One, because we talked about this being the year for them in terms of like the end, where we said that about Chicago last year, and then they traded Brandon Saad and proved us wrong. But the Rangers, I mean, are going to have some decisions to make here. There's a lot of talk about Keith Yandle in terms of his usage here in New York, and deservedly so. I mean, but at the same point, he's a young player. He's not a young player, but he's a player in his prime, and who's just going to get paid basically. After this year, someone's going to give him the money to probably be a number one defenseman, and the Rangers at this point are using him like a bottom third or even a bottom pair defenseman at this point. I mean, we all know Yandle's story in terms of how he's perceived around the league. With it became unbelievably public when that whole thing with Brian Burke and the U.S. team a couple years ago was coming out. With Scott Burnside's eye-opening story. But and it's fascinating because you look at what the Rangers gave up to get him. You talked about Anthony Duclair, who's basically helped speed along any rebuild out in the desert. So Yandle's a UFA, Dan Boyle's a UFA. They have a lot of money to Dan Girardi and Mark Stahl. They've got restricteds in Chris Kreider, who, by the way, is having a very, very nondescript and very bad year. That everyone just it's almost they almost have a lot of those potential guys that you're just kind of waiting on. Oscar Lindbergh's been a healthy scratch 2 games in a row. He had such a big, huge outbreak in the beginning of the year, and I mean it's almost as if the Rangers get home ice here, you almost have to think of Alain Vigneault as doing one of his best coaching jobs, because you talk about the Islanders tumultuous. I mean, all of their offseason moves backfired the Rangers. They got, except maybe Victor Stolberg. Victor Stolberg's been pretty good. But if you look at, Jarrett Stoll was supposed to help them in the faceoff dot and penalty killing, and he's not even on the team anymore. And Emerson Edom was supposed to be, that power forward prototype that they love, basically to shore up that left side with Nash and Kreider. And Edom's not even on the team anymore. And Kevin Hayes has been, not very good. And, I mean, he had an egregious turnover that led to that led to the tying goal Thursday night. And, you look at a lot of the players that performed for them last year that got them to that President's Trophy level, and they haven't performed well, this year. I mean, Zuccarello and Brassard are essentially carrying that team. And Dave, another year older after this year. You mentioned Lundqvist, another year older of him. I mean, Lundqvist essentially carried them for the first, third of the year. So you have to think that at some point here, Lundqvist is going to wear out a little bit. Their defense has already shown signs of cracking. And, the window, you almost have to say, is closing faster than we expected it to, even though there are defensemen in the pipe. I mean, it seems like the Rangers would lose more because the Islanders are almost still building with some of their moves and some of their deals. I mean, the Islanders have a lot of really young players on their team still. I mean, whether it's Strome or Nelson, and Nelson's been great this year, both playing with Tavares and elsewise, and Anders Lee. And they still have, they have a couple young defensemen still. Brian Pulak still in Bridgeport. You think you almost look at the Islanders on the rise still.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you say that, because I think that for the Islanders to go out this year and lose in the first round, I would say that they've very much stagnated, that they are they're happy to make the playoffs. Where are they going to get to that next step? So I think it's going to be fascinating if these teams play each other, because I think the loser of that series will have to take a very hard look in the mirror and decide that maybe some things have to be done internally to figure this out. But
Dave, I think that, and you kind of alluded to it, but I said this all along this year, that if the Islanders don't win a playoff series, that they're going to clean house. Is my feeling.
I would think so.
Because what has Jack Capuano won? What has Garth Snow won? I mean, they're still at 23 years and counting since their last playoff series win. So, I mean, like you said, almost in that same boat where the Rangers were a few years ago, like right after the lockout, the most recent lockout, where they had been to the conference final with Torts, they had been to the second round with Torts, and then management said, okay, screw this, we need to get to the top of the mountain, and they did that. So, almost the Buck Showalter thing in baseball, where he was the guy before the guy.
Yeah.
And you almost have to perceive that as such. So, I mean, I would favor the Islanders at this point in a playoff series, although even though the Rangers are going to play 7 home games, essentially, given the proximity. But either way, I can't wait for it. I'm really excited for it. Like, it hit me this week that it's probably going to happen. It's like, I'm just like getting real excited for it.
It's going to be tremendous, absolutely tremendous. But just real quick here, just because I think it's a point of interest, because Pittsburgh and Tampa are finally starting to come around.
Yeah.
And one would think that the cream does tend to rise to the top. Mm-hmm. And of all those teams that are kind of on the cusp, even throwing Boston in that mix, Ottawa, who's been terrible, the Devils, who are decimated by injuries, and I don't think they'll recover. So on and so forth. Carolina hang. I think Tampa and Pittsburgh are probably going to be the 2 teams that get those wild cards.
I'm on board with you, man.
That's if Tampa doesn't even slide in, or both teams could slide into a 3rd spot. But assuming both those teams make it as a wild card, and then who do you think is more dangerous? For me, I have to go Tampa, just because I think that if they can recapture some of that magic, we know how good they can be. But it wouldn't surprise me either if Pittsburgh played Washington and gave them a much more difficult series than it needs to be.
I think it's, me. I've been on Pittsburgh's bandwagon for the whole time here.
I have not, though.
I know. That's why we're disagreeing on this, because you just got the vibe that Pittsburgh was going to find it at some point, because their way, especially if with teams like the Devils and teams like the Hurricanes, around them, in front of them, etc. Philadelphia, don't sleep on them either, by the way. They're coming on here a little bit.
They have
their goaltending's been phenomenal. But Pittsburgh, because once Letang got healthy, it was what was going to keep them from performing. I mean, their problems have been injuries in terms of defense, and they fired the coach when the coach was in over his head. We all agree about that. But they have an NHL coach now. They have so much skill on the roster. They have a pretty solid. I mean, when you look at Mata and Letang are a number 1 defense pairing on any team. So if they have decent defense, if they have the skill on all, and they have the defense that's going to push the play and get the puck to the offense, and Fleury has been fine, they're going to be fine, has been my thought the whole way. It's just a matter of when it's going to happen. But when it's going to happen, to me, was whether they did it in time to get in that mix, because it gets late, but the rest of the division has kept them around, in terms of Carolina and the Devils and the Flyers, and even Ottawa and Boston you mentioned, because, those are some very mediocre teams I just named. Carolina, Devils, Boston. I mean, we thought before the year, Dave, we talked about teams that we thought were going to be very bad or just plain bad. And Boston, Ottawa, Devils, Carolina were 4 of those teams. And those are the teams that Pittsburgh has to hop. Oh, by the way, they have games in hand on all of them except Boston. So if you have to think that Pittsburgh's going to kind of take off here and leave the rest of them in their dust and kind of cement themselves into that 4th spot in the Metro, that's always been my thought. I just kind of been waiting for it to happen. Especially, like I said, with games in hand. Carolina's play is remarkable to me, but they just need goaltending is the thing. But I would say Pittsburgh, because of the skill, because they have an NHL coach now, and because I just think they're more talented than Tampa. Granted, those teams are close. Don't get me wrong, and Tampa's terrifying because when they get that skill rolling, they can be. I saw it firsthand last year. But I think it's more important for Tampa because, once Tampa gets back into this year, you'll start seeing the Stamkos thing kind of die down, and you'll have to think they'd have more of a chance to bring him back.
Yeah, I think to me the answer to this though is a lot more convenient than having to dissect either team.
Yeah.
Whatever team gets the 7 seed is going to have, or the first wild card is going to have a much better situation.
Yeah.
Playing against the Florida Panthers, who I think are a great up and coming team, and we've waxed poetically about them enough. I don't need to get into it, but either it's them or Montreal gets hot, or even Detroit.
Right.
I would much rather play one of those teams than play the Capitals. So
Sure.
I think the answer is going to be, I mean, look, Tampa or Pittsburgh possibly against Florida. I don't know that I don't take Tampa or Pittsburgh in that series. Even Detroit, if it's Detroit, or Montreal. I mean, I think if Montreal gets there, they'll have played well. They'll really have turned it on enough that they could
Carey Price will be back too.
Yeah, and that could be a huge reason for that. But to me, I think that it could be just about getting that 7 seed. So, it's going to be interesting in that regard, because I don't care who you are. I mean, look, Tampa's had some bad losses to the Capitals. I mean, the Capitals don't lose at all anyway. So why does it matter who they play now?
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be fascinating. I think the main thing to take away now is that we're starting to see these races really kind of solidify. We know who the cast of characters are going to be, and it's going to be a dogfight down the stretch here, because you see teams that are, not giving up, refusing to die. It's going to be fun. I can't wait to get into the last couple months of the season here, because I think we're going to see a lot of changing in some of these divisions and playoff spots, because it's wide open.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you straight on right now. And I don't think I'm alone in this. I'm going to root for Pittsburgh to get the 8th seed, just because that way you'll get Pittsburgh and Washington in that first round. And it's interesting to me because you look at what Pittsburgh and Washington has been in the past, and it seems like the league has kind of taken a step back. I read an interesting thing by Chris Peters from CBS Sports about why it's not a problem at the moment for the league that Sidney Crosby's not at the All-Star game. And, you think about how much Pittsburgh and Washington was pushed down our throats over the last maybe 3-4 years.
Oh, yeah.
Especially considering the fact that they never played a playoff series in head-to-head in that mix. They only played head-to-head in 2009, which, by the way, was an epic playoff series. So you look at that, and you say, well, of course, but if we get that in an actual playoff series, Dave, then you have to think that, it's not that it'll be forced anymore. It'll be that we're going to start. I mean, this is why they changed to this method, was to get Pittsburgh and Washington in playoff series.
Oh, I think that was the biggest driving force. No joke. If you ask me why they changed, I think it was because they wanted Pittsburgh and Washington every single year to play each other.
Yeah, I mean, and let's face it. Let's be real here, Dave. This is not a contrived rivalry. This is a legitimate rivalry that past playoff performances and proximity also have helped. And it just has helped that there are star players on both sides now. But when you get that, they genuinely hate Sidney Crosby in Washington and vice versa. But Dave, here's a question for you that kind of came out of the blue here. Detroit Red Wings of 96 still hold the record for most points in a season, 131. Are the Capitals going to get near that? Because if you look at it right now, they're on pace to win 63 games, and the Red Wings of that year won 62 games.
It's possible. I would think they'd be stupid to get that far, just because I think that you need to start resting guys. You need to maybe give Braden Holtby quite a few nights off.
Yep.
Starting soon, not just in March. But I mean, you should be worrying about his workload now, because you're expecting him to play 4 rounds of playoffs if you're Washington. That's your goal. They could get there, especially because they just haven't been slowing up. But I would think that if they were smart, they would take the foot off the gas and realize that there are bigger fish to fry than just getting a record that really is meaningless. But
they're on pace for it right now. They're on pace for 131.5 points, which we all know you can't get a half point. But if you round up and say 132, that'd be an NHL record. So
it would be impressive.
We haven't seen that, and think about that. That Red Wings team lost in the conference final to Colorado, which is, almost to your point, teams with regular season records, sometimes you don't remember them. But it's fascinating because, like you said, they're so hot and they're so good right now, and they don't have much of a weakness, and you just wonder whether we're watching history here.
Yeah, it could be absolutely fascinating to see what this team does. But again, you have to make it in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as
especially.
Yep. And look, again, it's just everything we've talked about, just talking about these different races and these teams, it's setting up for look, we'll both admit that this is a much better regular season than last year.
Yeah.
That there's a lot more intrigue. And I think it's going to set up for the playoffs to be even better because when you've already established some interesting things coming into the playoffs, I think it only makes it an easier time to set these up, especially if the Eastern Conference playoff matchups end up so interestingly, and the West could as well. So
I mean, you're talking about having with Colorado getting back into this and Nashville letting everyone back into this, you're almost looking at the prospect of Pacific Division wild card at this point.
Yeah, which is funny you wrote it off so much, but
Anaheim's got 3 in hand and is behind Colorado by 4 points only.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't an Anaheim versus Chicago or Dallas series be fantastic?
With Anaheim on the other side of it, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be great. But all right, Pat, just before we get out of here, because I know we've gone a little long tonight, is there a game for next week, so Monday on, that really kind of tickles your fancy a little bit?
Well, first off, there's a holiday Monday, so which is interesting because there aren't any day games. I'm a little surprised by that. But if I'm looking beyond Monday, I mean, you get Boston and Montreal Tuesday, which obviously there are huge stakes there. You also have Chicago and Nashville Tuesday in Nashville, which what that's like. And
it's a home game for Chicago, of course.
Yeah, and then the nightcap of that on Tuesday is Dallas and Los Angeles. Right now the two best teams, the best team in each Western Conference division. You could almost make that as a litmus test for Dallas, because if Dallas is going to learn how to play and win in terms of that we said that half court cycle game, if you will, you're almost going to have to see it on that Tuesday night game. So I'd say Dallas and LA with Chicago and Nashville before it. What about you, Ben?
For me, it's actually going to be the San Jose Sharks with the Arizona Coyotes, just because we've talked so much about Arizona, and San Jose is kind of getting out of the doldrums because they were real bad for a while.
Yeah.
That's a big game.
Jonas Donskoy, by the way, if you haven't seen his shootout goal on Cam Talbot, go watch it. It's from Thursday. It's incredible.
It is. But yeah, that's my pick there. I think that's an important game just because maybe it's a game that people from those fans and me care about and no one else does. But I think it's fascinating just because you're going to have one of those teams with another 2 points, maybe even 3 total. I think it's just great to see these teams, San Jose getting back in the mix. And Arizona has just been defying all expectations, and to me they're must-watch television. No
Dave, real fast before we go, San Jose's favored in a playoff series against Arizona, right?
Not by much. I don't know. I think that's a toss-up right now.
I think that you'll get a lot of San Jose, a lot of Bay Area fans in that building, but I say that because I know San Jose and I don't know Arizona as well, so. Like you said, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. We will be back next week with plenty more. Have some guests lined up for the next couple weeks as well. Pat, it's been great. I'm Dave Turner. This was Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. We'll catch you next time.